It is day 149 of the second Trump administration, and this evening, Donald Trump is considering a possible U.S. strike on Iran. That is according to several current and former administration officials. The president held a meeting with his national security team in the Situation Room earlier today, and a U.S. strike is now one of the options on the table. This all started last week when Israel carried out strikes on Iran. The two countries have been firing at each other for several days now. Two U.S. officials tell NBC News that Iran is prepared to strike U.S. bases and assets in the Middle East, but there is no reason to believe anything is imminent. Earlier today, Trump posted, quote, "We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran," and he demanded an unconditional surrender from that country. Here's what he said about the conflict overnight. Watch this.
What are you looking for here?
An end, a real end, not a ceasefire, an end.
So something that will be permanent.
Yeah, or giving up entirely. That's okay too.
New reporting from the New York Times lays out how Trump's thinking has changed from initially urging Netanyahu not to attack Iran to now possibly joining the attack. The report describes how Netanyahu has been trying to convince Trump to back a military assault on Iran for several months, and in the end appears to have judged that, quote, Trump would ultimately come around. It seems also that Trump's TV habits may have played a part too. Remember, Thursday night when Israel's attack on Iran started, well, the White House released a statement from Marco Rubio distancing the U.S. from those strikes. The Times goes on to report that when the president woke up and saw how Fox was praising how well executed the attack was, he could not resist claiming some credit for it himself. Here at home, several lawmakers want to enforce the part of the Constitution that gives Congress the only power to declare war, not the White House. It's Republican Thomas Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna who are planning to introduce legislation that would require Trump to get congressional approval in order to join the conflict in the Middle East. We got a lot going on. Let's get smarter now with the help of our lead-off panel. Jeff Mason is here, White House correspondent for Reuters. Lucky you, Leanne Caldwell is in the flesh at 30 Rock, chief Washington correspondent for Puck, and Amna Nawaz, co-anchor of PBS NewsHour and an MSNBC contributor. Mr. Mason, let's start with you. What is the latest out of the White House? Because their messaging has been changing. What are you hearing tonight?
So a few things. I will tell you, I was at the White House today, and there was a time when we were expecting that maybe the president would address the nation. That, of course, did not happen, and White House officials around him downplayed that possibility. In terms of the decision-making and the latest about his thinking, he did hold a meeting with the National Security Council this afternoon, and clearly, as you were laying out in the introduction, is leaving all options on the table in terms of whether the United States joins in these attacks or not. I spoke to some White House officials later this afternoon, or I should say earlier this afternoon, who said that very phrase, that he was leaving all options on the table. And that is a shift. That is a shift for this White House and this administration after making clear that Israel's attack on Iran was entirely unilateral, and that though the United States was helping in its defense, it was not privy or part of the attacks against Iran. I would add to that in addition to sort of the risks that involves militarily, there is also political risk for the president in contemplating this now. He portrayed himself and has portrayed himself as a commander-in-chief who wants to bring peace to the world. That has been his philosophy behind trying to get negotiations going between Russia and Ukraine, and in getting Israel and the Gaza conflict resolved. So the MAGA, as we have seen, the MAGA supporters are divided on this potential development, and that creates some political challenges for him, in addition to the challenges, of course, of potentially becoming party to a new war in the Middle East.
I'm going to put this in context for us. If the United States would strike Iran, how does that change this volatile situation? It's got to be a game changer.
I mean, it would be a significant change, both as Jeff has laid out, in how this president approaches the rest of the world and America's role in it, right? As he pointed out, this is a man who ran on not becoming further entangled in anything overseas, in America first, and more of an isolationist approach. But it would also be an incredible game changer for the entire region, not just for Iran. You have to remember, you have a weakened regime that's already in place there in Iran, an aged 86-year-old Ayatollah Khamenei in charge, who's already faced a lot of domestic pressures over the years from the internal population. And I want to point out, the Iranian people here are caught in the middle of all of this, neither supporting their oppressive or repressive regime, but also now the subjects of the bombardment from the Israeli airstrikes. But American intervention at this point could be sort of a range of options. You've already got some intelligence support going on. You could have refueling capabilities for Israeli missions. You could have joint U.S. and Israeli strikes, which would also be a game changer. Or you could take it a step further. You could have American B-2 bombers carrying out American strikes on Iranian nuclear program facilities. And we know that the Israelis don't have the capability to take out some of those facilities that are buried deep underground, like this site at Fordo we've been hearing so much about. It would take an American bomb to do that. And so this is what the experts tell us who've been watching the region, who know the American capabilities, that if America were to get involved at that level, yes, it would wipe out Iran's nuclear program. It would continue to significantly degrade and derail the regime and the power that they hold. It would be a game changer for Iran and for the region.
Leanne, reading this New York Times report, it really does sound like the Fox News coverage, which was praising Israel and how they executed the strike last, what was it, Thursday night, impacted the president the next day, right? Marco Rubio, night one, distancing himself, and the next morning, Trump's like, yo, we were in the mix.
Yeah, exactly. So, like you said, Rubio was like, well, we didn't have anything to do with this on Friday. Saturday morning, Donald Trump wakes up and he's watching Fox News, his favorite program, who is glowingly talking about what Israel is doing in Iran. And Donald Trump seems, according to the New York Times, didn't want to feel left out of this glowing review that Fox News was doing. But something that was also really interesting in that New York Times story that really stuck out to me is how Netanyahu was extremely concerned about Donald Trump going down the same path as Barack Obama and the Iran nuclear deal, and during Obama's term, which Israel did not approve of. Donald Trump pulled out of that deal, only to be negotiating a deal right now that Netanyahu was worried was going to be actually a very similar deal to what Obama had negotiated back then. And that's perhaps part of these strikes was an attempt, according to the Times, that to ensure that that Trump does not sign a bad deal. So there are so many moving elements into this. And another thing that's also interesting is that Donald Trump and his administration this time, he had done such a good job of having loyalists, people who are like-minded with him. And still, despite that, he seems to be wavering and flip-flopping on how he is approaching his previously no-war, anti-interventionist stance.
Amna, how about the part of the New York Times reporting that basically says Netanyahu thought he could force Trump's hand? What does that say about not just Netanyahu, but how other countries are now interacting with the White House?
The interesting thing about the relationship between these two men is that they've both agreed, Netanyahu and Trump, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Every American president has maintained that. The difference has been, how to get to that endpoint. What's interesting here is that they may have disagreed on how to get there, but Netanyahu seems to have pulled Trump closer to him over the days. And I've actually spoken to a senior Israeli source tonight who told me that Netanyahu and Trump have been speaking regularly, directly, multiple times a day for the last 5 days. And so that's significant to me because that shows that conversation is very much ongoing and evolving. But in terms of how the rest of the world sees this, I think every time there's any kind of foreign action or foreign intervention, we see how not only our allies in different nations look at this moment about whether or not President Trump can be swayed from previous positions he has held tightly to, but also how our adversaries view this moment. who is the president listening to? Who is he susceptible and sort of vulnerable to in terms of influence in the moment? Now, this is a president, I should point out, White House officials always tell us, like to keep all of his options open. He likes to have all these available lanes that he might be able to walk down. And they say that this is no different, that the situation has changed. And so his position may have evolved. But at the moment, we don't know which way he's going to go.